Hello, my friends. So nice to have you with us here for Quartet. Thanks for coming and being with us. We get together like this once every couple of weeks to make a deep dive into some issue of great significance relative to the transition on the world. I'm John Peterson from the Arlington Institute, and I'm joined by Gregg Braden from New Mexico. How are you, Greg?
Hey, John and Penny, I'm really well personally, and I'm coming to you as usual from our studio just outside of Santa Fe. I am especially excited about this topic today, John. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to see where we go.
And Penny Kelly.
That's me. Hi. Hi, everybody. It is good to be here. I'm doing well. I just returned from transition talks and I actually had my first 2 days of regular schedule in like 7 months. Like, woohoo. So,
Yeah, we had a wonderful time with you here. Frank is on the road today, Frank Jacob, and so we'll miss him. But we're going to talk about current events. And so we'll have a good discussion as we lean into all of this amazing stuff that's going on all around us today. So let's start by checking in. Penny, what's on your mind? What have you been thinking about?
um, well, I've been thinking about the two wars that are really ramping up. I really have been all over the planet with my perception lately. The whole thing is shifting. The planet herself, that has been on my mind. I think people need to understand, and this is probably going to be wiped away as new age woo-woo stuff, but the planet responds to what's happening in consciousness. And when we keep on ramping up and agonizing and arguing and fighting and worrying, the planet often gets into turmoil herself. And that I see that is like, uh-oh. So that's been on my mind. I think the other big thing is the what I'm going to call the changeover. You know, the two wars are symbolic of that changeover. I think they're going to finish the old system. And so I have been really focused on, okay, do we know what we want? Are we headed in the right direction? So those are the things that have been churning.
Yes, timely. Yeah. Greg?
Well, I got a whole list here, but I'll be I'll be brief. Since in the last 2 weeks, of course, everybody's focused on the nuclear showdown in the Middle East and what's happening there. I have been fascinated by the narratives that are being given to the West, especially the American population. Very, very different narratives justifying what it is that's happening and why it's happening. I think that will probably come out in the main topic that we have today about where the world is going. But I also know when things like that are happening, other things tend to get sidelined. And I think something that just was announced by the UN this last week and very little coverage is that there is a particularly virulent strain of COVID that has reemerged in China, and they've been very concerned about it. They're back to hazmat suits and testing and all of that. And this last week, it now has shown up in 4 U.S. airports: California, Washington State, New York, and Virginia. And I don't know what the response will be, but I suspect we will have some kind of a national response because of the nature of this strain. It's very different than the ones, much more virulent than the ones we've seen in the past. And of course, overshadowing all of that, July 1st, the gold is set to become a tier one asset, which is going to it's going to cause a shift and a revamping in the financial system as all central banks have to now compensate for what that little change in designation means and that's going to impact markets across the board. So all of that has been overshadowed by what's happening in the Middle East. And just a little side note, I think a compelling case can be made that we're in World War III. It's just not the kind. It began as a financial war, trade war, cyber war. We're now in the kinetic phase. I did a little experiment. I Googled to see what Google thought about us being in World War III and Wiki. And Wikipedia says that World War III is a hypothetical global conflict. So it's really being downplayed, and a lot of the media is downplaying, looking at these as spontaneous, isolated events rather than part of a global process. And again, I think that will come out in our conversation today. So that's what's been on my mind.
Good. Thank you, Greg. I've been looking and thinking about the same, a lot of the same kind of things, and particularly this narrative business. Boy, there's a lot of stuff going on, churning underneath all of, what we know and what we think we know. That's all being driven by vested interests who are all trying to control this thing, and it's interestingly transparent this time around. I mean, I'm sure that kind of stuff has been around forever, but it's nothing new. But maybe it's a function of the internet and other such things. But if you're observant, you can see the stuff all over the place, and everybody's playing games with everything. And so, anyway, we will talk about more of that as we go forward. So that's what we want to talk about a little bit today. Is what in the world is really going on here? Quartet by design is about this big transition and trying to look downstream and anticipate and make sense out of some of the elements of that are the contributing factors for this emergent new world, and so that we can build a paradigm. We can build this environment that we can make sense out of things. But every once in a while, we come back, and because the current events are so crazy and interesting, and we talk about current events. And so we're going to do that a little bit today, and see if we can make some good luck, make some sense out of where this is all going. I just to set this up, I mean, what we're sitting here is on the edge of World War III. I mean, I guess you can't go by a day almost if you're looking around at multiple sources without that kind of notion standing up to one place or another. And it didn't used to be the case, but I'd just like to remind us all that Martin Armstrong has been talking about this for a long time and saying that his computer projections from his Socrates computer was saying that between 2025 and 2027 that there's going to be a global civil war. And and it was kind of prefaced by this World War III kind of starting up in about 2025, which is where we are right now. And that's one thing to look at kind of theoretically and abstractly, and yeah, sure, that's that's possible. But it's another thing to kind of think about the underlying driving forces that are pushing us in that kind of direction. One that Martin says, and says that is the foremost driving force, is that that the European nations in particular have an extraordinary kind of debt crisis that is rushing toward them, that in the next year or two at the most It's likely to bring down all the governments in Europe if something isn't done about it. What something is being done is an attempt to get World War III going in order to have an excuse to then uh, re redo the currency across not only Europe but probably the whole planet in one way or another. I mean, this is part of the logic that you could say why Trump and the United States is trying to get involved in this is because they all understand and they're looking downstream and they understand what's going on. I mean, I don't want to oversimplify this because there's a whole lot going on in the Middle East, some of which has been going on for a long time, but that can't be sidestepped. But nevertheless, there is an imperative. This is an existential situation.
I'm looking at something much bigger than that. I think that layer is what we would call the weeds. I don't want to get caught up in the weeds. I think there's something much bigger. So let me just begin. I'm going to do short term and long term. Short term, events happening in the world. I think obviously there is a realignment of global power dynamics that is happening. And what we're seeing is, I think, the effort to break up many of the large power structures that have been in place for, the last 1,000 years, and especially, or even more recent. We're definitely looking at the effort the EU wants to break up Russia into smaller countries, primarily because they need the resources. Much of Europe they don't have the rare earth minerals, they don't have the fossil fuels. They rely on other countries for that. There's an attempt to do the same thing with the U.S. to break up the continental U.S. into smaller nations, and the resources are a big part of that as well. Canada, and it's happening in Iran and Iraq as well. I'm a geologist. I've got a background in math, computer science, and I've worked out the gravitational constants. It will be a miss. I think there's a good chance that it will be so close, it will be fragmented. And our gravity will it will draw in fragments of that asteroid, not one big impact, but many smaller ones that I think may wreak havoc right before that 2030 date. And we know this date, we can calculate April 13th, 2029. Geologically, there are geophysical parameters right now that are cyclic, that are right on schedule. And one of those, every 12,000 to 13,000 years, we get a super volcano. The last few have been in the Phlegarian fields in Italy, precisely where the seismic activity is ticking up. People are being evacuated. Something is happening there, but the date is uncertain. We cannot say with certainty when that will happen. The last wild card is human consciousness. When people respond to what it is, the way that humans respond to what it is that is coming to their doorstep. I think as a population, we will turn our back on war. I think we're going to walk away from war as a civilization, as a way to solve our problems. Yet, I think we need to retain the weapons we've created to defend our planet if that need should ever arise. We don't want to be a weaponless planet. We just don't want to use them upon our own populations. So I think consciousness awakening will walk away from the war and the violence because of what we're seeing right now. So all of these things you have to ask, who benefits? And the answer to that question is probably another quartet we could do. But I'm going to close right there, and that's what I see happening from the world events.
Well, thank you. Very interesting. Penny, what do you think about all that?
Oh my. Yeah. So Gregg, you did such a good job. I have been trying not to harp on that theme of this is a planetary takeover, for the last few years. And so, but thank you for that. It's like, yes. So I focused on a whole smattering of things. I just took the question, current events, what's happening, and thought, okay, let me look at that. And the three areas that I focused on where the war in the Middle East and how we came to that and why, and then the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, and then the financial reset that just happens to be occurring in the midst of all of this, which I don't think is accidental at all. They have upped that pounding just in the last week. It's kind of like, oh, nobody's paying attention over here. They're all paying attention in the Middle East. But they are headed for splitting Ukraine, and everything east of the Dnieper River is really going to be Russian. And the other, what's west of the Dnieper River is really going to be broken up into a few pieces. So, and maybe some return to Poland. But the big effort right now in terms of Kiev, if it's not Kiev, it's Sumy. And Sumy is where the drone control center is for the Ukraine operations, and that is the next Russian target. If that goes, there goes the rest of the Ukraine capability completely. And then the financial system keeps on creeping along. And what we see in terms of finance is that there's going to, what I'm seeing, let me qualify that, is that there is some kind of vulnerability along the coastlines of the Americas. And if and when that vulnerability is taken advantage of, and there's big water problems happening both in the Northwest and in the East, the financial reset, if you would call it, falls apart and comes together in a whole new way. So I think there are targets at Amazon and in the Northwest that are going to have some problems. And I'm not sure where those are going to come from, but I suspect they are going to be sabotaged. And that will sabotage a whole lot of things. So in a nutshell, the big war is an effort to take down the Rothschilds and to get control away from the Italian families. So I'll stop there for the moment.
Well, interesting things. You touched on a couple of things that I know a bit about, and one of them is these exotic weaponry systems that are kind of underlay a lot of what is going on here, it seems. Tom Bearden, in particular, was particularly articulate about these scalar systems, which operate outside of electromagnetics into a kind of a different area. And they have, when the representative from Science and Technology for the United States stands up, as he did, 2 months ago, and says that we have the ability to change time and space, what he's talking about almost certainly are these scalar weapons, which 95 plus % of the people in the military and certainly in Washington have no idea about. And these weapons operate on a whole different scientific basis. And they essentially have the ability to change an area, a defined area of volume anywhere in the world at a distance. And so you could take the air out of it or the electricity or shut it down or whatever it turns out to be. It turns out that these weapons or this basic technology is applicable across a whole different set of domains. One of them is personal, and so that they can, when Donald Trump says, we know who the supreme leader of Iran is, we know exactly where he is. Well, that's could be very well that he's talking about scalar weapons, because you can essentially take the signature, energetic signature of a human being, and you can not only target it, find it anywhere, but target it, and you can then, using these scalar weapons, which are very exotic and strange and seem very much like science fiction, but you could take out somebody directly right there, wherever they are, whoever your savior is, in whatever terms. And so on one hand, there are these deep divisions that we've mentioned a little bit about. These deep divisions in terms of perspective and outlook that are just becoming hardened as you go into this. I mean, there are people like this guy who's our ambassador to Israel, who, he'd like to have the tribulation show up here. The sooner the better, and he's trying to facilitate that. And so, anyway, there's more at play here than that most people know about.
Well, you just covered a whole lot of ground, John, and Penny. I think is it Mike Huckabee who you're thinking of? It's our ambassador,
right,
ambassador to Israel. John, I actually had the opportunity in 1987 to meet some of the people working with the scalar technology. I met Tom Bearden in '87. And even then, this is what the SALT treaty was all about. The hangup in the SALT treaty wasn't about nuclear weapons. It was about they look like radar dishes, but they're used for scalar weaponry. And they were creating, and we saw demonstrations of, it looked like, it's what you said, it looked like a bomb, but there's no heat. It's a cold explosion, which is kind of a mind blower because it works on a very different principle. And the only reason I'm saying that is that was '87. Who knows how far they have now taken this technology since 1987. Penny, when you are talking about what you see as the historic text suggests that you're right on when you're talking about what you're seeing with the wars. I did a video on this, a couple of videos, not from a religious perspective, but from a purely historic perspective in the book of Psalms. Psalms 83 is essentially a remote viewer looking into the future and identified the war that we're in right now so precisely, the exact names of the countries. And there are two wars. There's an inner circle war and outer circle. We're in the inner circle war now, and they identify Israel against Lebanon and Syria and the some of the other surrounding countries, and that Israel prevails in the first war. And it is the fact that Israel prevails that triggers the second outer circle, which is Turkey, China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. So and this is what we're seeing now. Iran is turning to Russia and China. If the current leader, if he's allowed to go into exile somewhere, Russia said they'll take him. So because they have economic interests, primarily oil, and technological interests. So we may, according to those historic predictions or views, or if you want to say a remote viewer from 2,000 years ago, it's playing out just the way it is mapped in Psalms 83. Anybody can go and look at the video I have on my YouTube channel, Gregg Braden Official, or you can go to Psalms and read it. So the question is, are we locked into a predetermined sequence of events, or do we love ourselves enough to awaken the consciousness that's possible to break those prophecies and to break those predictions? And I think we won't have to wait long to find what the answer is to that question.
No, I think, my God, my brain is exploding here. So one thing that I have to say is that I know that there are weapons that exist that will just dissolve somebody or something. Just dissolve it by collapsing or dispersing all of the frequencies that make up that thing or that individual.
Mhm.
And what happens is the space just fills in because that thing, that person, that object no longer exists. And so that's the kind of weaponry that I think is hiding. I don't want to see that used, but I know that my people have that. And that's something that if we're working with some of those people, I think we have some vestiges of that kind of capability. So that's one thing. Let me see if I can organize my thoughts enough. The whole thing, I know a lot of people that are heavy duty Christians. They really believe that we need this war for the Messiah to come. But the thing that has to happen, it's not that Jesus is going to return in the flesh, if he ever was in the flesh. It's that the Christ consciousness is really, I'll use the term scheduled, or the pattern that's unfolding on the planet is going to produce Christ consciousness in those who don't want to go down with the wars and all of that other stuff. And so the quote unquote, the rapture, we often hear about that. What is that rapture? That's really, to use modern terms, that's ascension. And to use even more down to earth terms, it's an expansion of consciousness into high level realms, in such that the chaos happening at some of the lower frequencies can't be seen, heard, felt, and those chaos activities don't affect or impact us. And so we are, there's a concept that we have that I don't know if it appears in literature, because I don't read old literature, but I would be interested. If anything you've read, Gregg, would maybe fit in. Every so often, because the pattern that's unfolding is going to drive some people to a higher frequency, you get this concept of a harvest. The harvest is people saying, okay, I'm not having any part of that. And gradually it seems to quiet down. But what's really happening is that they're moving off into a different world. A world is something that's created by people that gather like-minded people in a particular region, and they live and work together, and they implement their ethics and their rules, etc. So we're coming up to a period where the pattern, unfortunately or fortunately for those who are prepared, is going to offer this ability to, for those who have done the work, to move into a higher range of consciousness. And that, I think, is part of what's happening right now. And typically, it's not always war, it's what's happening with the planet herself naturally, the disasters and things like that. So, yeah, and I have a question, Gregg. If the Apophis is coming through, wouldn't that, if and that's below the satellites, wouldn't that have just huge reaction electromagnetically?
Yeah, see, this is my concern. I've done a lot of research on this. I've been watching this for a few years now, since it was identified. And as a geologist, a geophysicist, I'm fascinated by this. There is, I didn't go into this here because it's more complex. If you look at Newton's law of universal gravitation, there's a
Right.
very complex formula, but you can work it out on your, on your notepad at home.
Yeah.
So there are different levels. There are high altitude satellites and low altitude satellites, and it is coming. It's projected at 19,500 miles above the surface of the Earth. That is lower than our stationary high altitude satellites. So what the media is saying, not a thing to worry about, and I'm saying, okay, the physical body may miss. Now, the asteroid that took out the 66 million years ago, took out the dinosaurs. That was about 6 miles in diameter. And this is nowhere near that. But it's big, the size of the Empire State Building, moving pretty fast.
Right.
At the very least, the tidal implications on the oceans
Right.
and the fact, and so NASA now is admitting, they're saying there may be seismic activity on the asteroid because of Earth's gravity, which means there is a possibility that we're going to see fragments of that thing breaking off and coming down. And even if it misses now, it will come back in 7 years. And because of where our gravity has taken it on this pass 7 years from now, it's a very, very much more dangerous trajectory. So,
Yeah.
so I am concerned about that. It's not the most important thing right now, but I think we need to acknowledge it. And maybe, you look at the money and the people that have the ability, a lot of those are going underground right now. They're building, 60 Minutes did a special out there, building underground facilities, continuity of government. Our nation is certainly building underground facilities under the ocean as well as continental US. So they know something is incoming. And it's interesting that we're not hearing more.
Wow.
There's
about
an
that.
element to that, Greg, that's that perhaps people aren't talking about. But if you got something like that flying in underneath the geosynchronous uh, satellites that you're up
Sure.
above, around the equator, well, what that thing is going to do is just going to take out communications and all other kind of satellites like crazy. I mean, you can't run something like that. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of satellites up there, and when you run that through the middle of it, it is just going to tear a hole in the middle of it all.
I agree, but it also has the potential, if the people of the earth on the brink of or in the midst of global war, if all of a sudden our very existence is threatened, it could bring this planet together. It could actually be a very unifying principle in a very beautiful way. Again, I don't think we're going to see a direct impact, but I think we're going to see I don't know how we could not see fragments, and that's just my opinion as a geologist, as a geophysicist. Penny, the other things you're talking about all come down. I mean, there's the bigger picture, and it's framed in ancient traditions as the battle between good and evil. Evil is anything that denies our human potential. So anything that denies us from being the best version of ourselves, from attaining the highest expressions of consciousness. And the good from the Christian perspective is, and when you talk about the rapture and all those other things, that is where we attain the highest expression of our biological potential fused with the spiritual energy that our DNA formula allows us to hold in this world. We ignite that potential and we shift our reality. So it comes down to the fundamental principle of good and evil. So if our planet is going to be occupied, are we being occupied by a force that supports our potential or denies our potential? My perspective is if that force is driving our climate back to something that's not good for us, if it is encouraging the war that decimates our population and reduces our ability to defend ourselves, that's probably not the force that we want to align with. And opens the door to an even bigger conversation.
Yeah. And not only that, there are people who are ready to defend the planet. Should that take over a thing? Should we not be able to manage that ourselves?
Yeah.
But we will lose a lot of people along the way before we get to that point.
We already are. And that's why I consciously use the word occupation. And John, another conversation, I'd like to talk to you about this, whether or not we are open to sharing our world with another force, if it's possible to do that, because they benefit from us or we benefit for them, or if it is an either or. And
No.
and when we look at the historic perspectives, Penny, it's interesting because it seems that this has happened before. This is a cyclic event about every 12 to 13,000 years. There's a catastrophe, and then we get help to rebuild that catastrophe. Some are taken away to miss and survive the catastrophe. They come back and they start over again. And I don't know how many times we've done that, but I know certainly as a geologist, we're on track for a catastrophe that has, let me say it this way. What are the odds of a geophysical catastrophe like we saw during the Younger Dryas 10,000 years ago? What are the odds of that happening every 10 to 12,000 years? For the last 75,000 years, the odds are 100%.
Right.
Because it has happened cyclically since 75,000 years ago. Every 12 to 13,000 years, we've had this event. So I think it's just a matter, we can't pinpoint the exact date like we can Apophis, but maybe Apophis, this is the piece I didn't want to get into. It could be, John, the forces that you're talking about are enough to trigger perturbations in the inner core, perturbations in the magnetic field,
Yes.
perturbations that stimulate the volcanoes that now, and maybe that's exactly what happened in the Younger Dryas. People say it's either or. That comet impact is maybe, could be, and the forces are there to upset the balance of those geophysical processes, and you see that as volcanism, tectonic activity. So yeah, not much being said about that right now, and I think the silence, and especially from the authorities, is really interesting. It's not far away, 2029, and we know the exact date, April 3rd. I think it's a Friday. I think it's Friday. I think
Friday
April 13th is a Friday.
Friday the 13th.
2029. We should do a quartet on April 13th, 2029.
Ooh.
We should have a party. We should plan a party.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
You know, I mean, all of these things, I think what we're looking at is we're looking at the catalysts, but when it comes to consciousness, that truly is the wild card because it's us and we get to choose. And any one of these events could drive us to a deep awakening quickly where we say we're going to walk away from war and suffering. It could unite this planet in a heartbeat more than anything else ever has. And I think that's a very real potential.
I agree. And I think, and I've said it a couple times in the past, the biggest, most powerful tool in the world is consciousness.
Yeah.
We don't use it well. We don't know that. I mean, we just think I don't know what people think, but it is such an incredible power. It changes everything. And we don't recognize that we're all walking around with a nuclear bomb in our brain. And we
in
just
a good way. In a good way.
in a good way. Yeah, right.
Right on, Penny Kelly. I love it when you talk that way.
Yeah, all right. Yeah.
Okay. I don't know. It's we really need to take charge of our lives and stop being distracted by all of the crap that's happening. Keep an eye on it, but keep moving in a direction that says, no, we're going this way. We're making this happen. We want this. And we're going to live in such a way that win, lose, or draw, that's what we get. We have something beautiful.
Right. Well, that's something to look forward to, and we'll talk about that in a couple of weeks, I'm sure, in one way or another, when we get together again. Quartet, for those of you who are new to here, is a program of the Arlington Institute, which we started about over 35 years ago. And we're in the business of facilitating the transition to this new world. And we try to do that. We're a think tank, and we came out of the Washington, D.C. area, where there are a lot of these organizations around trying to think about different kind of things. And we think about the future in general and this transition in particular, and perhaps uniquely, we try to make sense of it intellectually in fora like this, where we have an opportunity to do a deep dive down into different subjects that are central to this whole transition. And so we very much appreciate that you come and join with us and are part of this every couple of weeks. We come to you from Berkeley Springs, West Virginia, our little resort town that's just 100 miles from Washington and Baltimore. And we're in the Appalachian Mountains, two mountain ridges in from the coast. And it's a delightful little place where we're trying to build a community that is able to kind of transition into this new kind of space. And so we hope you'll come back. You can find information about all of this at arlingtoninstitute.org. One of our programs is called Transition Talks, where we bring speakers in from outside. And Gregg and Penny have just been here in the last 45 days, both of them. And our next speaker is Tom Drake, which is in July. And Tom is one of the most famous whistleblowers that's come out of the National Security Agency. He's right behind kind of Edward Snowden. And he is going to talk about his own kind of process and his own journey from being deep in the middle of that system to where he's come out and he sees the world in a whole new way. The man has got great intuitive kind of skills, and he sees the world in an interesting way with it's coming up. And so we hope that you'll look that up and come and be with us. That's in July at transitiontalks.org. So thank you so much.
Thank you, John and Penny. Love you all. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Take care.